By the end of this conversation, you are going to understand what the most overlooked subject in psychology and self-help is. Today, we are going to discuss what lays at the center of every argument, of every fight, of everything that goes wrong, and is the beginning and the end of every major problem that we all face in this world. And I promise you, if you understand what we're talking about in this conversation, and if you were to understand this topic properly for your life, you could get so much better out of life. So if you're here because you really want better, you will want to stay till the end of this conversation, because we're not only going to give you some knowledge, we're going to give you some skills that you can really use to get better out of your life. Let's go with it.
So Lise, we've been doing this now for 20 years for me and 7 years, maybe even 8 years for you, depending on the date. We started the research in 2004, and collectively we've done over 100,000 hours. I've done over 45,000. You've done over 15, maybe getting closer to 20,000.
I have no idea.
A lot of hours. And we're finally launching something, which is very, very exciting for us. And what we're launching is what we class the number one emotion that people need to understand and even master if they intentionally want to get better out of life. You've always wanted us, in our search for releasing content, you've always wanted us to go after emotions. And the emotion that we're going after today is frustration. And basically it's going to be our core subject for a very long time, until we've released as much content as we possibly can on it, that people can learn about the importance of frustration and how to get better from managing it to a better state in our life. Why did we choose frustration?
Well, to answer that, I think you've just touched on it. I always wanted us to concentrate on emotions, and I can just maybe talk about it from my old perspective before I then take it into why have we now kind of gotten back to that. The reason why I always wanted to concentrate on emotions was because even though I wanted better in my life and I was really looking for better, what always held me back was my emotions. The pain that I had were the emotions. And I really just wanted to learn how to manage that. And back in the day, I would have gone, how can I remove it? How can I just not have this? Just make this stop. So I think when you're kind of in an emotional and a mental hole, it's just that the emotions are so huge, they overtake you. Or you're getting to a point where you're kind of numb to emotions a little bit as well. But when you're consumed by emotions, it's really hard to focus on better. So that's why I always wanted to concentrate on emotions. Looking at it now, why have we kind of come back to that after all the research? As you said, 20 years and 7.5, almost 8 years for me, is because we've realized that frustration is one of the most overlooked subjects in psychology and self-help that is stopping every single person from getting better in life. Frustration and the way in which we as adults and teenagers and even older children have learned to use it is what creates the majority of the unnecessary problems in our world without us even realizing it. And at the same time, if we were to learn to manage that frustration, the way in which we've learned to use it and take it back to a natural state, we actually would get so much better in life. It would be the doorway to improving a lot of things.
With regards to, you touched on something, so I'd like to ask you a question about that.
Yeah.
We either bottle up our emotions or we live through them. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Most males bottle them up, some females. Most females live through them.
Look, if we had to say one way or the other, I would say you're right. Most males do bottle them up and most females live through them. However, we do know that females mainly live through sadness and crying, frustration as well. We know that it's a part of that, but that males live through anger and that deep frustration. So we both live through it and then kind of choose to numb down other emotions that we, from a gender perspective, have been taught we are not allowed to feel or not allowed to show.
Yep.
But really looking at humans in general, we all numb some emotions and we all live through other emotions and let them out. As a majority and in general, we're not very good at managing our emotions to a better state.
We certainly can see that when we all occasionally explode with emotion or because of emotion, whether that be bottled up or because we live through it or via it. I just want to touch on frustration for a second. Thank you for that answer. Frustration being irritated or bothered. Yep. And frustration being irritated or bothered either physically or mentally.
Yep.
And so the reason we're going after frustration why we're trying to go after frustration to help people first is because if we can help people with that physical or mental irritation or that bother that they naturally get in life, then they can understand it and manage it better. They're going to get better out of life, yes? So if we just say irritation, bother, any other word that you would use, or are you happy with those two?
Irritation and bother, I think, are the simplest words. And I think what you said, that it's from the physical and the mental perspective, are really important.
We know that we get irritated and bothered from a couple of different levels. And I touched on that from a natural perspective. So I'd love you to tell me what the levels are. However, I'd love to start, if you don't mind, by, am I right? Is it natural? Because when I first was researching and understanding and having bottled up a lot of the understanding about emotions, I really questioned whether people had to show emotions or were allowed to show frustration, or whether they had to toughen up and you're not allowed to be frustrated, even though toughening up is like almost being frustrated without realising it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's a great example of, I mean, you're a male, having learned for a long time you're not allowed to show emotions. It's a big question mark then, are emotions really natural? And now that I'm researching, like, should everyone just remove them? Should we just live in a world without emotions, really, or without the negative perceived emotions? So to answer your question, and for everyone out there, yes, frustration and similar emotions, that mental and physical irritation and bother is 100% natural. And it's not just natural, it's actually necessary. But to explain that, and that's very different than what we're talking about here. We're gonna go into deeper levels, but let's take it to a baby, shall we?
Yep.
So a baby, you've got a son, he's 3 now, Sonny. And when Sonny was born, he didn't have any language, right? He didn't have any words. He was pretty dumb, like most of us humans when we're born. We don't have any physical or mental abilities to use. So what was the only way that he could communicate to you or your partner when he had a physical weakness, like hunger, he was cold, he was in pain, he needed safety? How did he communicate?
Well, when he was first ripped out of my partner and he was then turned upside down, the first thing that he basically did was yelp.
Yelp.
Like, help me! Like, frustrated, like, what's going on here? Almost urgent, like, what am I doing from an environment perspective? I do remember that the doctor basically said, oh, he doesn't want to talk to us yet. And then a little bit later, thus was talking. It was his explanation of it through that frustration. Help me! Help!
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
So which is a beautiful example because that is exactly why the frustration is so very natural and so very necessary. We as carers rely on a baby to utilize sadness, frustration, and eventually crying to communicate to the adults that there is a need that they need fulfillment with.
Yeah.
Without those emotions and without them, the physical being able to utilize those emotions, babies would die because we didn't know when to look after them or what need to fulfill at what time. So the emotion is 100% natural and 100% necessary, because even now when Sunny is now 3, as I said, and he started learning thoughts at some stage, but he didn't have enough words to yet communicate. Excuse me, Mum, I don't know how to put my sock onto my foot. Could you please help me with that? When he didn't have those words, he still utilized the physical being's first language, being sadness or frustration in that case. That way Mum knew he needed help. And then it's up to the carers to help the child understanding what the frustration is for and replace that with language, replace it with help me, asking questions and utilizing words instead of the frustration.
I don't know if we've touched on it, and if we have, I'd like to extend on that point. It's an alarm.
Yeah, it's an alarm.
It's a first language.
Yep.
It's an alarm.
Yep.
And it's an alarm that a newborn uses, as you said, to notify a carer, helper, hey, I need something. And for example, I think it's a swaddle. A swaddle, when they first come out, they're wrapped up really, really tightly because that's where they're like in the belly. And we know that it's an alarm for, oh my goodness, something has changed and I've got to breathe for the first time. You're kidding me. There's that yelp, help. Because it really is just an alarm for help.
Yeah.
Whether that be in the first instance from a baby's perspective, the helpers or carers, but really in the long term, an alarm for us to recognise that there is something that we need to fulfil, to look after, to take care of.
Correct.
Yep.
100%.
All right. So you've done the natural, necessary. Take me through the necessary. It's a natural physical frustration.
Yep.
What about the necessary?
So the necessary is the second layer, which I didn't explain quite well or put together, where we said Sunny is now 2. Let's say he's starting to learn some words and he's trying to put a sock on. So it's a mental frustration.
Right.
I'm trying to learn something. I don't know how to do it. I don't have the physical abilities just yet.
Yeah.
And I don't have the words to ask you nicely for help. So Sunny trying to put a shoe on or a sock on, not having those abilities would then result to frustration because his mind copied this beautiful alarm, this beautiful mechanism from the physical being, put it into the mind, and now the mind is using it to also ask for help.
And I didn't mean to insinuate that you hadn't covered that.
No, good.
I'm just going through my head looking at that explanation from natural going, that's cool. Now just highlighting that necessary alarm that's copied with everything that is fulfilled from a carer's or a helper's perspective. Sunny or a baby or you or we learned thoughts. And then we, based on a mental perspective, as you said, copied it from the physical being because it worked. That frustration got me something. So why wouldn't I use frustration as a communication until I learn language? Is that right?
Yeah, beautiful explanation. I like it.
And with that, I then advanced my learning on top of that and grew my thoughts to, depending on the level of nurturing and how responsible or responsive that was then able to learn language to replace that frustration with.
So isn't it beautiful when we look at frustration from a natural and necessary perspective, how it's always been a tool to learn, to grow, to advance ourselves physically and mentally from a natural perspective.
And I have to say, through many, many years of the research, I really didn't grasp that. And only in the last 4 years, 5 years, did I really understand that the communication through emotions was so important, that it was okay. It just shows how I was taught or raised to go have little understanding of it and just go and accomplish things, go and achieve stuff, but not necessarily know how to feel that. And certainly not to know how others feel it, for example, females. Now, my goodness, totally different, and do I have an appreciation of it? In saying that, and saying that I do appreciate it, I also have learned that where Sonny, and you brought him in, young children, toddlers, and growing up into teenagers and going through and experiencing new things in life, we're always going to feel that frustration, that sadness, and even cry and even step into anger. But how much of that is necessary and natural as opposed to the next level, the unnecessary? Can you explain?
Yeah, should we first discuss what unnecessary,
please,
or what the next layers are? All right, so, and sorry, after that I'll then say how much do I really think is natural and necessary in us adults. So we've discussed that we've got the natural, which is from a physical being. We've got the necessary frustration, which is the mental utilizing it to help and learn thoughts. And then we've got the next layer, which is the unnecessary. Unnecessary frustration, or unnecessary sadness and frustration. And the unnecessary is when we learn words and language, and we have meanings, and we have the ability to ask questions. We can ask why, how, where, when, how much, and something else in the W questions. So we can ask questions, but we simply don't utilize that ability, and we're going back to a baby's language and still utilize the sadness, frustration, and even crying to communicate, to ask for help. So you, for example, do something that I don't like. So instead of saying, "Why did you do that, Phil?" I go, "Oh, why did you do something like that?" That's adding an unnecessary layer of frustration to something that I could simply ask a question of. Because if we think back to the necessary frustration, the mind utilizes necessary frustration because it doesn't have another ability to manage a question or a weakness or something that it doesn't know, and that's why it utilizes it. If we're an adult and we've got language and we've got the ability to communicate what bothers us or irritates us, so that natural layer, that is still there, but we could communicate that just through language, then it's not necessary to add that frustration. So that's unnecessary. But we then even go further, which is unnatural frustration. And when we step into unnatural frustration, and I almost stepped into it in that example that I've just given you, we add blame, we add shame, we add anger, we add yelling, we add fighting. So we add all those unnecessary skills that don't create anything but devastation and destruction for ourselves and for our relationships. And again, it's not utilizing frustration for the natural purpose that we discussed, which was simply to advance ourselves and learn thoughts. Does that make sense?
To be alarmed, to look at something that we can learn, improve, and be better with.
Does that explanation make sense? Or is there anything that you would add and simplify?
I think that I was really in-depth listening, and I have a good understanding of this. But I was really intent, and I was trying to learn some new things or relearn or reinforce my learning when you're explaining. And I was looking at really, the thing that stood out to me was I go from a natural use as a toddler to a necessary use, from a baby toddler to young child. Natural, necessary. And my parent and carer helps me to do that with language, as you said. Then what happens is that there is a point in time where I, as a child, a toddler, am treated with unnecessary frustration because a parent or a carer or a teacher thinks I should know better. And thus I'm then learning to unnecessarily use it. So rather than be asked a question without a bad approach or treatment, without a bad behaviour, it's as though that I'm going to learn to unnecessarily use a bad behaviour with the natural use or necessary use of frustration, because that's how we've learned to speak. That's how we've learned to adapt ourselves into life. And then what you've said is to even use it to teach somebody something, to show them I'm friggin' annoyed, to show them that I'm irritated or bothered and now going to the next stage of really not liking this. Even to a stage where I'm intentionally using it to force somebody to learn something.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to show you my disapproval, my disappointment, and how dare you, and you should be ashamed of yourself. With which then shows us the 4 stages or 4 levels: the natural, the necessary, most beautiful thing in the world, I really understand, to the unnecessary and unnatural, the ugliest. The ugliest in life. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a point here that I need to take into consideration where I think you said as a teen and adult, 99%, or you're going to tell me a percentage.
Yeah, I haven't yet, but you know the percentage, so feel free to share.
That a great percentage, well, I want to hear what you have to say. A great percentage of it is not required.
Yeah.
The majority.
Yeah.
We're not saying natural and necessary is not required, because it is required. It's just how much of it is not required. And in many instances in life when we are teens and adults, we don't need it. We have language. We can ask questions. It's just that we're taught to ask questions with a bad behaviour, which means that we're using frustration unnecessarily and unnaturally in most cases.
Yeah. And on top of that, we've never been taught about the point of frustration, what it is there for. We've never been taught that we actually have the abilities to manage our own emotions when they come from a natural place, from a physical being's place. So if we don't know that we have the ability to actually manage these emotions, we just take them as natural. All of it, the whole range. And that's, I think, the point that, psychology and self-help has really missed. That yes, frustration is natural, but to which depth? There is no place out there that really defines the different stages of it, and that there is parts of it that are natural and parts of it that are unnecessary and unnatural. And if you ask me my thought about what is natural and necessary and what is unnecessary and unnatural, I think it's really, really important to define that every single time that we are unnecessarily and unnaturally frustrated, there is still that layer of natural frustration there. It's
and
there.
Even necessary.
That's the physical being or the mind saying, hello, excuse me, can you please look at this? It's just that we could, if we were to understand it, take that, look at it, work on it, and put it away. We take that and we make this huge ball out of it. Based on everything that we've looked at, it's about 99% of frustration that we as adults use or show that is unnecessary and unnatural. And I have to say, for me, learning more about myself, the unnecessary is bad, but it's the unnatural that really creates all the problems. Because unnecessary is really just, I have better abilities to manage it, and right now I don't know how to manage it, and I kind of wallow in that emotion myself a little. The unnatural is I take it out to everyone and everything else, and I create just this ugly virus of everyone else getting frustrated too. That's where I think the real problems in our world come from. I don't know if what you think about that. You may have a different view on that.
I have to be very careful because, as we said, we could go a million different directions with this because of the study and the research, what we've found from it. So I'm just trying to keep it at a surface level because we could lose ourselves let alone losing those that are watching this. So I just want to touch on a piece. And the first piece that I want to touch on is, isn't it amazing? We all know when frustration is unnecessary and unnatural. We've all been there. Let me give you an example. I have at times gone, why did I do that after I've had an argument or a fight? All right? And gone, geez, I should have handled that way better. That was bad behaviour. Have you done the same thing?
Oh, 100%.
And then there's days where I've gone into 3 to 5 days of it knowing full well I went too far and it was bloody awful. And I know 2 or 3 incidences where I did that in my life and lost very close friends. Because I lost it. That was not necessary. That was not only unnecessary and not natural, it was so unnatural, it wasn't funny, and I'll live with that for the rest of my life. And I can't say there's not incidences where every person knows that there is something wrong. We're doing something wrong with that frustration that takes us to that stage. What we've now done is come up with, and adding weight to now the second piece of why we're going after this, is that we actually truly believe it's been missed, as you said, by psychologists, self-help. It has not been focused on enough. Its importance, I couldn't overstate enough. Like, I couldn't push the point more. It is the most under-discussed topic or subject, I think, in mental health, in all communication, relationships, whether that be what we could do better in our work, in our home, with raising our kids, in our love lives, etc. Like, it's just so underrated and so missed, but so importantly powerful when mastered or understood. So I just wanted to touch on that depth. And you've been through that feeling. You have known in the past, in your youth, that it was wrong. That frustration and where you took it to. Would you agree?
Yeah, there is many times where you feel like what you're doing is so bad and so wrong, but that's where it almost breaks you inside, because I still don't know what else to do. That's all I'm feeling. As I said, if you don't learn to take that initial feeling that is just there from the physical being or the mind to say, there is better, help me. Like, it's just communicating to us, and we don't know that we have the ability to take that little tap and really work on that. What unfortunately happens is that it grows so big and so big and so big, and then it does take over, and you don't know what else to do. So that's where it's such a difficult line, right, between the natural and necessary and the unnatural. And whilst it's unnatural, we don't have the skills to actually manage it a lot of times. So did I know that it was really wrong? Yes. Did I do it even though I knew a better way? No, because I didn't know a better way. I didn't want to feel that. I didn't want to hurt people, but I did not know how else to help me or how else to communicate that something is going really wrong and that I'm so lost. I hope that explains it.
Oh, it actually leads me to the next question. How could we have known what was right or wrong except from a conscious or a conscientious perspective by making the mistakes and taking things too far? Even though what it cost us was so heartbreaking. You can't. So how does, Lise, understanding this help us from the stage where we may be today, where we use frustration unnecessarily, unnaturally? We're allowed to use it from a natural and necessary perspective, and understanding this to a way deeper level than what we're going to present here. What is so good about it? Like, why is this so important to us? What is so powerful?
So I think there are 2 sides to it. For me, what is so incredibly powerful about it, I think the first side that I want to go to, we've talked about the unnecessary and the unnatural. And if I look back on the way that I used to manage myself and the way that I used to let frustration take me over, I created the majority of the problems in my life. The relationship breakdowns, the sickness, the physical sickness that I had, the stunting my own learning, not being able to go after new things that I really wanted to go after. I created so many negative results and consequences because of my horrible use of frustration that led to anger, led to shame, and so on. And that frustration was really just the base for all that. The frustration was the cause of all those bad negative results and consequences. So if I learn how to better manage that frustration and take it back to the natural, I forego most of those unnecessary and negative results and consequences that we don't want.
Yeah.
But there is a second thing. What happens if I don't have those and I go back to the natural and necessary frustration and really learn how to sense that and what it's trying to tell me and take that for what it is? Well, then I actually follow my physical beings and mental purpose, which is using frustration to tell me, hey, there is something that you need to look at. So then I take that, I've done this a couple of times, so then I take that little, feeling there and go, oh, what are you trying to tell me? Oh, there is a weakness. Okay, let me see how I can fix that weakness. And I fix it and I put a new thought in my mind and then I'm done and dusted and I've learned something.
Yeah.
So instead of creating negative results and consequences that create so much hurt, if I know how to manage frustration better from a natural and necessary perspective, I actually increase my opportunities in life. I learn so much more. I create better relationships because I learn with the people that I'm in relationships with. And to be honest, I just create a world of happiness for myself. That's what it does for me. You might have a different view, or maybe you can put it into better and simpler words. What is it for you? Why do you want to concentrate on frustration?
I like it, but I'm going to touch on something first. You said that it's your fault that you went from a natural and necessary state to an unnecessary and unnatural state and hurt so many people, including yourself. Wasn't that your family's fault, the carers and nurturers' fault? Wasn't that everybody that had raised you fault? Or was it your genetics, your DNA's fault? Was it you had these traits built in, so it's all yours? So look, I'm a little lost. Which one is it? Is that is the argument of nurture versus nature, which isn't really an argument anymore, because it's a mixture of both. But isn't it your parents' fault, predominantly?
Sure. But then my parents went through the same thing, didn't they? So whose fault is it that my parents didn't learn how to manage their frustration or sadness? It's their parents' fault. And whose fault is it that my grandparents didn't learn how to do that properly? Well, it's their parents' fault. And so on and so on and so on. So we can go back thousands of years in history. I think we talked about this the other day. There was a moment in time where we went from having a very, very small mental ability to having a larger mental ability, to learning words, to being able to recognize frustration.
Yeah.
And whenever that moment in time was that we had words, could recognize that feeling, and could have asked for help, that is the moment that we should blame that we didn't learn this. But then again, it was natural back then. So it's really no one's fault. It's a historical problem that we all learned. Our physical being has given us this amazing natural alarm to tell us that there is better. And it's no one's fault that we really didn't know that that's what it was for, or kind of lost touch with that. I can't blame anyone but me. If I were to blame everyone else, then where is my accountability for it? So it's a lot more fun to be accountable for it and say, now that I know it, I'm going to take charge of that and improve my own life.
Yeah, thank you. 7 years ago?
No, it was everyone else's fault. Point the finger in every direction. That was one of the first things that you've taught me. Accountability. Wherever you go, there you are. And if you don't like where you are and you stay, whose fault is it? It's yours.
Yep.
Something along those lines.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch on that. And I wanted to touch on that because everyone through life has had traumatic experiences, and some devastating and horrible ones. We have, and we will in the future go through some as well. And ones that just are the saddest things ever. And we could be frustrated and at times are a little frustrated, but we really try and peel it back to that natural and necessary perspective, because the unnecessary and unnatural, which sometimes we'd like to do, doesn't do anything good for anybody and only eventually hurts everyone, including ourselves, and especially ourselves. And when we do that, the domino effect of hurt is just horrific. So we get it, we feel it. Please understand the unnecessary and unnatural. We get it. Sometimes we want to do it, but we just can't if we want to get better out of life. You're going to say something?
Sorry,
Please.
I was just going to say, I think it's really important, and you've touched on it, and I think you've explained it, but also from my perspective, we do misstep. We do unnecessary frustration. I think more than the unnatural, but we do get it wrong, and it's not as though we're perfect and never step into it. It's just that we're so aware of the problem, and we have the right tools and management abilities to pick ourselves up in that a lot quicker. And we also have the privilege of being surrounded by wonderful people who help us with that, and pick us up and give us a look when we might be doing something wrong. Go, you may want to look at the way you're talking about that right now. Oh, okay. Yeah. Pull my head in quite quick.
Thank you. And we'll touch on a couple of that skill, or a couple of skills, or what we use to help ourselves a little later. If I go back to now the question that you raised, what does the understanding of this help us to achieve? And you said peel back from the unnecessary and unnatural to use the natural and necessary. And I'd like to go the other way around. And you raised Sonny, your godson, and my little boy, and how teaching him about frustration from a natural and necessary perspective as a parent to your young toddler is just so beautiful, because his learning improvements and better are fast-tracked to where people keep saying he's quite tall, but his language is amazing, his communication is amazing, and people in comparison think he's 5 and 6. Maybe because of height, but then when his communication and his ability to understand something is so non-restricted because he has no fear, he is moving forward with picking things up really, really fast. So what's happened is, over his first 3.5 years using our research, we've been able to continually teach him about his frustration, bring him to language to learn to ask the word for help, to teach him that it's just an alarm for something that is a weakness that he needs to learn, improve and be better with, that he then communicates with us to determine, and then we help him to learn, improve and be better with that faster. So whilst he's doing that, he's, and I think you touched on it before, working in line with his natural purpose to continually get better faster. That's to his ability, his potential, his capability. And at 3.5, that potential is not great, but hey, let me tell you, he's stretching the limit of it through the management of natural and necessary frustration. And is he allowed to get frustrated? 100%. But does he have to do it unnecessarily? No. Does he have to learn it unnaturally? He's got to learn the unnecessary and unnatural to know that that is a point you don't want to go much further with, and that others are doing it in their life and only hurts them and will only hurt you. So then by doing that, we keep him on the track of from that frustration, that beautiful frustration, sadness, and tears, he can take a line to better manage that. Keeping him away from the unnecessary and unnatural as much as we can, where he can dip his toe into it, but then doesn't suffer the unnecessary consequences of it. For example, using unnecessary disapproval, disappointment, shame, those words that you said before, towards himself or to others. And he doesn't use frustration to teach himself or others. And that he keeps the questions that we're teaching him, the 7W questions, as you touched on before, as beautiful and as natural and as innocent or as curious as possible, without any bad behavior of frustration in it, cornering people and making people fearful of him, or making him unfriendable. Do you know what I mean? Because he's a bit scary, because he's picking on their weaknesses and not doing it very nicely, using that bad behavior with that frustration. And so I see it from the parent raising a child perspective, going out to older child, teen and adult, and being able to see that and manage that to a better state for less of the worst consequences and better and more of the better consequences. But I can only do that by being an adult and learning from the unnecessary and unnatural backwards to the natural and necessary, and then help others with the necessary natural to the unnecessary and unnatural. And only when you do both those ways, right, it's like you've got to go backwards to go forwards. Only by doing that are you really able to get the greater understanding of it. And we were just blessed to have a young child at an older age, and through this research to be able to check it. And it's just so beautiful, because it really has advanced our learning to then help him with his learning. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I don't think at this stage, no.
All right. Okay, Lise, to help people to get back to that state where they can really look at themselves from how we've had to learn from unnatural and unnecessary perspective. And we've been doing this for 4 years now to
Just
really
focusing
advance this.
on that, yeah.
What would you say we have done that's really helped us that others could do that would really help them?
I mean, understanding the problem is the first thing, right? So understanding the layers of frustration, something that we've kind of surface levelly explained in this video, and then knowing why we were actually given frustration from a physical perspective and why we've learned to use it from a mental perspective, knowing what it's for, I would say is the very first thing.
Yeah.
But knowing what it's for doesn't really help you to then go, oh, I'm just not going to do unnecessary and unnatural frustration anymore. That would be easy. That's not how it works. See, as we just very, very shallowly touched on in this video is we've learned thoughts every time that a weakness was fulfilled, meaning our mind up here is this beautiful, amazing, huge library of thoughts. And every single one of these thoughts has got emotions attached to it. Yeah. And if we've used unnecessary and unnatural emotions, frustration, throughout our lives, a lot of those thoughts have that unnecessary and unnatural frustration attached to it, meaning it will continually come out. And us saying, I'm just not going to use it anymore, is not possible, is not going to happen. So what we've found and what we've done and focused on for a long time is that we had to find the limiting and negative beliefs that we have about frustration as an emotion,
yep,
and about weaknesses that are the cause for frustration. Because we get frustrated, as we said, with Sunny or with us, whenever there is a weakness, whether that's a question we have, something we're not able to work out, something goes wrong, or a physical weakness. So we really had to look at what are those beliefs that we have about frustration and about weaknesses that push us further into using those emotions. And then how can we replace those beliefs with something better that helps us to stay in the natural and necessary? And with that, we then found the skills that push us further into using unnecessary and unnatural frustration, and the skills that whenever we use them actually helped us to stay out of it. So we mapped out, in very simple terms, we mapped out what beliefs we had attached to frustration and weaknesses and what skills we had attached to it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. You know what? I think that if we haven't touched it, we certainly, if we haven't touched it enough. I want to ask you what belief and skill you would use, for example, or have used in your life, continually use. But I really want to touch on something because I think we might have been a bit remiss.
All right.
We get frustrated, sad, cry from a baby because of a physical need, survival need in the first instance, which is a weakness that is being alarmed using sadness, frustration, crying, or even anger as we get older to ourselves and others. But what are weaknesses? Like, what is actually alarming us, making us frustrated? Being frustration as being the operative emotion. What is the dominant physical and mental weaknesses that we need to go after when being alarmed?
Do you want me to touch on that?
Please.
All right. So the definition of a weakness is the opposite of strength, something that we lack ability in, something that we lack fulfillment in. To give you some examples, a physical weakness might be being hungry, not having slept enough, so being tired, not having done enough movement, for example, being cold, being in pain. And the mental weaknesses are predominantly not knowing something, thinking we know something, but turns out we're actually wrong, so it didn't turn out the way that we wanted it to turn out.
Yep.
And then basically taking those weaknesses, and that's how we create mistakes, accidents.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. So you've touched on the weaknesses. So now I'm going to peel back. What's a belief that you've learned about frustration that now ties into weaknesses?
So I'm going to give you two beliefs, one
All right.
about weaknesses and one
Okay.
about frustration, because they work so closely with each other. One is a weakness happens, the frustration comes on. What I had to learn about weaknesses is that I thought weaknesses were absolutely horrendous and horrible. I thought I was not allowed to have weaknesses. So the belief, I would say, is weaknesses are bad and wrong to have, and I'm not allowed to have them, and neither is anyone else.
That's the negative belief.
That's the negative belief that I had about weaknesses. If I then look at frustration, I made frustration right. Every layer of frustration. So with frustration, the belief would have been, as a teen or an adult, I am allowed and I should use frustration to communicate with other people. So that's what I had to realize, that's basically what I was running off completely automatically without really realizing. Do you want to know what I replaced that with?
Yeah, please.
So weaknesses, I first had to understand that weaknesses are not bad and wrong to have. So what I replaced that with is weaknesses are the most amazing starting point and opportunity for all learning, improvement, and better, because I understand now that without weaknesses, I wouldn't have possibilities that help me grow and learn. When I was born, I was full of weaknesses. I'm allowed to have them, and I'll continue to have them to the rest of my life. Weaknesses are amazing. And with frustration, I had to learn that frustration is only a natural alarm. that tells me that there is something I need to learn from, improve upon, or be better with. So as you see, they are very, very opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yes. The frustration before was I can get stuck in the emotions. Now it's just an alarm. Weaknesses was I'm not allowed to have them. They're bad and wrong, neither is anyone else. And now they're the greatest opportunity and starting point for all learning, improvement and better.
Yeah.
Awesome. So by focusing on those beliefs, the better and the negative of both weaknesses and, most importantly, frustration and the extension of other emotions. Because I think frustration is a beautiful one. I don't want to use it as negative. It's beautiful from a natural and necessary perspective. It just gets very ugly when it's unnecessary, and then even uglier when it's unnatural, when you understand it. And we all kind of know that anyway, without knowing this. So thank you. And I really like how you tied in the weaknesses into that frustration. And I like it so much so that if you may turn around and be asking questions, because my mind would be spinning, it has been spinning for 20 years, but especially the last 4 years, 5 years, really concentrating on this. And if it's spinning, I'm going to make it spin a little bit further. A lady that has been working with us and learning this stuff has basically looked at frustration and where it cocooned her and bottled her up for her never to raise anything about weaknesses because it's scary. She basically took herself out of that cocoon, turned into a butterfly, and went, I'm going to go after a weakness. So she basically unstrapped herself and went after the weakness and got the most amazing improvement and better from it. That at the end she went, it was just freeing. It was just so awesome for the first time to be able to say to herself, get rid of the frustration and find the improvement and better. Learn. What can I learn? So she learned not only can she improve upon weaknesses and help others to do the same, that she could unshackle herself from the frustration. And then I went, so you learned that frustration is just an alarm. You learned that the weakness was just an opportunity to learn, improve and better. And she said, yes. And I said, and you've got a couple of kids? And she said, yes. And I said, when you were raising the kids, did you naturally treat your kids as that frustration is just an alarm and that their weakness is just something to teach them to learn, improve and be better with? And she said, yes. And then I went, and then did you turn that to a state where frustration you were allowed to use towards their weaknesses because you thought they should have known better? So you then took it from this beautiful, natural and necessary perspective and then turned it into unnecessary and unnatural. And she went, oh, yes. And I said, and that's what you may have done to your kids then? And she said, yes. And that's okay because you did that to yourself. And she went, it's not okay, but yes, I did it to myself and I can see how I've done it to them. And I said, now see how that freedom is for you just opening up? They're taking yourself out of the cocoon and seeing what you can do with this? She said, yes, I can. And I said, well, you can now do that with your kids. And she went, oh, I can. And I said, now you can teach them that. You can also look at how you made mistakes. You did it wrong. But as you said before, Lise, she didn't know. They didn't know. Her parents didn't know. No one's known this. And the world really hasn't concentrated on it. There are some people who have touched on it. Some to a little bit of a degree, but mostly to a line in a book the other day, which was indexed, which was highlighted in the index in a book that I picked up about self-help and raising kids, and it was one line. So it hasn't been touched on much, but the growth opportunity here is extraordinary. So I wanted to touch on, you touched on the beliefs. So I want to touch on, and I love the beliefs. I live them, breathe them, I can feel them. I want to touch on a skill that I've learned, and it's chicken or egg story. Which one is it? You know, I met a professor in psychiatry about 7 or 8 years ago, and he told me that I asked him the question, what is the greatest breakthrough that we have in psychology or psychiatry or the self-help industry? You know, put them all into one. And he said, awareness. And I went, awareness. Okay. And I checked it with AI last week. What is the greatest? Awareness. And I went, you know what, I really like that. I struggle with that after 50 to 70 years, the greatest thing we've done is awareness. I get it. And maybe it comes first, but I would like to highlight to people what we have done that I believe if you do watching this, you will get the greatest growth faster than we've ever experienced because of what we're helping you with or making you aware of that we took a long time to find out. And that skill is for us to really work this out, to be aware of frustration. We had to be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable, I mean open to looking at where something could hurt us physically or mentally. And in this perspective, we're looking at what could hurt us mentally. What was the biggest thing that was hurting us mentally? And something I'd gone after from the beginning 20 years ago, not realizing I would still be here in a 5-year plan, 20 years later to go, well, I finally found what I needed to be vulnerable to, which was frustration at the outset. But if you really want to take advantage of what can hurt you so you can be better with it, vulnerability is the most important skill I would impart on you. And vulnerability to your use, unnecessary and unnatural use first, and even your natural and necessary use of frustration, sadness, which is just a beautiful emotion. Even crying as the presentation of it, or anger, and crying being the presentation of all those three, you will find that you will see one where you're using it and could be using your frustration and the other emotions with it way better. That's what we've done. And using the beliefs and maybe that skill of vulnerability to that will certainly set you on the right path. Anything you'd like to add?
Own it, it's yours. I think that's something that I had to learn, which the vulnerability
Your favourite
is certainly
skill?
a part of. It's being accountable. You asked me before, but isn't it everyone else's fault that, you didn't know about your emotions and then learned to misuse them and mistreat them and abuse them even in the end. And so, well, it's mine in the end. It's my mind. It's my ability to manage myself, and it's my physical being. And it's the most wonderful thing, being vulnerable to where you might be going wrong and where you could be creating your own problems, and then being accountable for that and improving it. It's like a little superpower. So I think that's what I would pass on.
Thank you. All right, anything else you'd like to discuss based on, we just wanted to introduce frustration and why it was important to us and what we believe people can gain from it, which is just amazing improvements with better, and amazing improvements in where we have maybe getting a little bit of worse than what we would like.
I think I would just want to end this from my perspective by saying that if you think that there is better in your life, that there could be improvements, whether you see at this stage that you're accountable for it and that you might have done some things, doesn't really matter. If you do think that there is better and that there could be improvements, then I would suggest that you look at your own frustration and at your own emotions, because on the other side of that lies the most beautiful improvement in life and all the things that we could really wish for. And it's something that we haven't been taught so far in this world. And I would really concentrate on that.
For me, you really want better in life, you go after the emotions that Lisa's always wanted us to focus on, starting with frustration. get to know everything about frustration that you possibly can. Whether you do that with us or external of us, whether you use AI or other people that talk about the importance of better managing, or understanding and better managing frustration and including weaknesses for the better. And you're going to find that better is not only seeable, it's achievable and way faster than what we think is currently available by exploring any other emotion and the depth of it. So for example, if you feel shame and you have people who say shame is the biggest problem, and or AI tells you shame is the biggest problem, and you want to go after that, that's fine, that's perfect. But what I'd love you to do is work with that in line with frustration, because you're going to find that no matter what other emotion or what other struggle you're suffering with, you're going to find that frustration from an irritation or an agitation perspective is found in almost every single negative or emotion that is alarming you for the good, or mental disorder or disease. And working in line with frustration plus concentrating on those will give you the greatest results possible.
I agree. With that, you guys, we will see you later. And obviously, if you've got any questions, any thoughts that popped in your mind, anything specific that you want to learn about, do yourself a favor, do us a favor, comment down below and let us know what you're wondering, what you're thinking, so that we can then go ahead and create some content on that, because we're obviously sharing this because we would like to help everyone. So if you've got thoughts, put them down below, and help yourself as well by liking this video if you don't mind, if you enjoyed this little journey with us, and even follow us so that you can see the other videos that we're putting out on frustration or other topics. And that way you're also helping us, because it gives us the ability to share this knowledge with more people. So with that, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for having watched this, and make sure to check the description below also for just any other resources that we might put in there for you.
Thank you.